Good evening. I'm Rachel Maddow, in for Keith Olbermann. This is Wednesday, July 9th, 118 days until the 2008 presidential election. Despite the restrictions on Americans doing business with Iran, American exports to that country have increased tenfold during the Bush administration, with America sending more cigarettes to that country than any other product, $158 million worth. So far, it doesn't seem to be a laughing matter, right? Apparently not if you're Senator John McCain. In our fifth story on the countdown, the Republican presidential candidate who last year sang "Bomb Iran" to the tune of the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann responded to a question about the administration's mixed messages trade policy by joking, quote, "Maybe that's a way of killing Iranians." Yeah, still not funny. Trying to find it funny. Can't find it funny. And somehow, just hours later, we're supposed to take his reaction to Iran's missile test very seriously. The latest round of saber-rattling coming after Iranian state media reported it had test-fired 9 missiles, including a long-range missile they say is capable of reaching Tel Aviv. In an interview with NBC's Brian Williams, McCain said Iran needs to be isolated. He stressed that action can't wait until a new president takes office in January. At a news conference in South Park, Pennsylvania, the Arizona Republican attacked his opponent, Barack Obama, for what McCain says was Obama's refusal to declare the Iranian Revolutionary Guard a terrorist group in last year's Kyle Lieberman amendment.
It's my understanding that this missile test was conducted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. This is the same organization that I voted to condemn as a terrorist organization when an amendment was on the floor of the United States Senate. Senator Obama refused to vote. He called it provocative. Called it a provocative step. And the fact is, this is a terrorist organization and should have been branded as such.
Not so fast there, Senator McCain. Senator Obama did support labeling the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist organization. He opposed Kyle Lieberman for totally unrelated reasons. In fact, last October, Obama co-sponsored his own piece of legislation called the Iran Counterproliferation Act, which called on the Bush administration to, quote, designate the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a foreign terrorist organization, end quote. Misleading much, Senator? Especially since you didn't vote on Kyle Lieberman either. While Senator McCain says he wants to cut off diplomacy between the Iranians and the rest of the world, on the Today Show this morning, Senator Obama called for aggressive diplomacy.
There's no doubt that we're seeing rising tensions in the area, and it's part of the reason why it's so important for us to have a coherent policy with respect to Iran. It has to combine much tougher threats of economic sanctions with direct diplomacy, opening up channels of communication so that we avoid provocation, but we give strong incentives for the Iranians to change their behavior. We've got to have the kind of aggressive diplomacy that unfortunately has been absent over the last several years. If we don't, then we're going to continue to see rising tensions that could lead into real problems.
Senator Obama also decried the hypocrisy that, as we mentioned earlier, during the Bush years, U.S. exports to Iran have actually increased massively. Senator McCain last night in Pittsburgh apparently all for those exports, at least jokingly, if they have the potential of killing as many Iranian civilians as possible.
We've learned that the exports to Iran increased by tenfold during the Bush administration. The biggest export was cigarettes. Given that supposedly
that's a way of killing them. I meant that as a joke. As a person who hasn't had a cigarette in 28 years.
29 years.
29 years. I can't tell you. No.
The exception is supposed to be mainly medical and agricultural. Does that need to be revisited, you think?
Yeah, but I'd like to look into it because it's the first that I've heard about that.
Time now to call in our own Richard Wolff, also the senior White House correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Rachel.
Let's begin with the joke here. I know that Senator McCain says he was joking. He says right away that it was a joke, but it is a strange joke if you're under the impression that American policy toward Iran is to try to change their government's behavior, not to just kill Iranian civilians. Should McCain be getting questions about that rather unsubtle distinction?
Well, yes, and for a start, it isn't funny, you're right. But there's a tendency inside the Beltway and with journalists in general to say this is just McCain goofing off. And it's McCain being McCain. And we're at a different sort of level here. This isn't McCain now as a jester, as a friend to the press. This is McCain as a Republican nominee, potential president. So at the very least, it's a different standard that he needs to be measured by. Most importantly, if you take him by his own standard, and Iran is this mortal threat to America, why would you joke about it? I mean, if it's that serious, then make people wake up to the threat. And at worst, of course, it just looks unpresidential and unfunny.
Yeah. And potentially provocative
right.
In a foreign policy setting. Defense Secretary Bob Gates today said that the Iranian missile test bolsters the administration's argument about the threat that is posed by Iran. How is it that things going wrong proves that the administration's approach works? How is it that things going dramatically wrong means that they ought to keep doing more of the same?
Well, to be fair, Robert Gates and his Department of Defense have been a moderating voice in the second Bush term. So, against the bellicose talk we've heard from people like Lieberman and the Vice President, I think Gates has actually been an important voice. But more broadly, you've got to ask, has the 7 years of policy of disengagement from Iran, of asking the Europeans to conduct diplomacy, has that worked? And the truth is, most analysts look at Iran and say, no, Iran is much stronger because of Iraq. This missile test is just another sign.
Even after the disastrous joke about killing Iranian citizens with cigarettes, the conventional D.C. wisdom is that the Iranian missile test and that the issue of Iran in general helps McCain flex his sort of foreign policy, national security muscles. Why is this seen as being an advantage for McCain? Yeah. Is it just that he's a Republican, or is there something else here that I just don't see?
Well, this is a very tricky one, of course, because when Wes Clark raised these issues, it kind of backfired in a way that was really out of kilter. But McCain has made the argument, and his campaign commercials make the argument, that because of his military experience, therefore he has national security experience, and therefore he knows about all of this stuff. Well, it's quite clear from this and confusing Sunni and Shia, for instance, that there are real holes there, that if Obama were to make these kinds of errors, people would be jumping up and down saying, rookie, he's inexperienced. So that's one side of it. But I think more broadly, Republicans are in a hole if they think that every time there's a national security crisis, it's good for them. It's a bit like Democrats saying, hooray, it's a recession, it's great for us. Right. It really is not good politics. People want to know how to be safe and secure and prosperous. Celebrating a crisis like a missile test is at least unseemly.
Richard Wolff from MSNBC and Newsweek, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel.